Dear student, today I'll talk about the story A Cup of Tea. A Cup of Tea is a short story written by New Zealand's prominent short fiction writer and poet Catherine Mansfield in 1922. This story was written on the 11th of January back in early 1922, which was first published in the famous Storyteller magazine and later appeared in Mansfield's short story collection The Dove's Nest. This story revolves around the character of a wealthy woman named Rosemary. She spends her day shopping and spending money lavishly. She met with a poor woman of her age named Miss Smith, who asked for the price of a cup of tea. Rosemary took her home and tried to help her. However, her intentions are not that kind. She wants to gain fame from this act of kindness. In the end, she wants to get rid of Miss Smith as her husband praises her for being beautiful. The story is associated with the deplorable conditions of New Zealand at the time when it used to be a British colony. The trends of class distinction were at its peak. A noticeable issue which needed to be brought forward influenced Mansfield to pen it down. Besides, this story holds class consciousness and materialism as its pivot point. Stunningly well characterized and magnificently portrayed against its plain title, this story remarkably presents a crystal clear image of class distinction and one's mad fondness towards materialism. It's just the same as the doll's house and the garden party. As a matter of fact, that these stories also reflect upon the same issue of class distinction. Mansfield also tried to reflect upon the noble act of philanthropy and how people fancy this act to be the cause of ascension for the moral values among the social circle. Summary: Rosemary Fell, a very rich and well-off woman who has been married for 2 years to a very rich and devoted man, Mr. Philip Fell, spends her day out shopping at some best corners of London in the finest of shops. She visits an ingratiating antique dealer's shop that shows her a beautiful small blue velvet box. Rosemary is taken by the beauty of the creamy piece of art but decides not to buy it and asks the shopkeeper to save it for her. Out she comes from the shop into the rain, and as she reaches towards the car, a girl approaches her asking her to pay for the price of a cup of tea. Astonished, Rosemary asks the girl to come home with her for tea, finding it an opportunity of adventure and experience, just like she read in books and stories of Dostoevsky. She wanted to show the girl that rich people do possess mercy. The girl agrees, apart from her great fears, to ride with Rosemary in her car. As they reach the house, Rosemary takes the poor girl to her room and asks her to sit by the fire. She helps her take off her coat and hat and tries to soothe her. As she tries to proceed further, the girl cries out that she can't stand it anymore, fearing that she will faint out of hunger. Rosemary hurriedly orders tea. The girl is provided with tea and sandwiches while Rosemary lights her cigarette. Came to know the story of the girl, Rosemary starts up a conversation with her which is uninterrupted by her husband. He is surprised to see the stranger in the room and asks his wife to talk to him privately. As they enter the library, Phillips begins to inquire about the matter. To this Rosemary replies that she is just helping the poor lady whom she picked up from the street. Her husband tries to tell her that she can't have a stranger in the house. Facing a refusal, Phillips points out that the lady is remarkably pretty, giving a rise to insecurities of Rosemary. Rosemary leaves the library and enters the study room from where she picks up some cash. She returns to her room and hands over the money to the poor girl, making her leave the house. After the girl leaves the house, Rosemary joins Philip back in the library and asks him if she could buy the velvet box, which wasn't what she wished to ask. After a pause, she whispers, "Am I pretty?" Means in the cup of tea. Appearance versus reality. In the whole story, readers may find the appearance in contrast to reality. On the surface, the person seems different. However, his intentions are something else. In this way, Mansfield portrays hypocrisy in New Zealand's perturbed society. Rosemary, on the surface, strikes kind and caring by taking care of Miss Smith. However, the reality of her intentions is full of hypocrisy. She helps her not out of kindness or cares, rather for her own interest. She thought by helping so would give her a chance of upgrading her status and boosting her action. In a similar manner, Mansfield pinpoints a society in which upper classes were taking advantage of virtuous acts for their own benefits. They help the girl to gain praise and material objects. Jealousy and insecurity. Rosemary has made a prototype of jealousy and insecurity. At first, she appears kind and helps Miss Smith, but in the end, when her husband Philip praises Miss Smith, got jealous and insecure. In order to get rid of Miss Smith, she gives her money. Afterwards, she did some makeup and tried to attract the attention of her husband by her charming looks. Materialism. These two things have been discussed explicitly in the text by Mansfield. Rosemary could be seen chasing material objects throughout the text. Firstly, she appears to be desiring an enamel box. Afterwards, she helps Miss Smith just to gain praise and upgrade her social status. In the whole story, she appears as a mean character. Readers may find her penchant towards material objects in the story. Through this Mansfield highlights how true emotions are fading from society and people are running after material objects. Class distinction. Class distinction is also explicit in the story. Miss Smith belongs to the lower caste. She even didn't have enough money for a cup of tea. For this, she begs Rosemary. In contrast, Rosemary is a rich woman having every luxury of life. She appears well dressed, while Miss Smith is in a miserable situation. This draws a comparison between both classes. On one hand, the wealthy are enjoying everything in their life. On the other hand, lower classes are exposed to hunger and disrespect at the hands of the upper classes. Literary analysis: A Cup of Tea is a short story written by New Zealand's prominent short fiction writer and poet Catherine Mansfield in 1922. This story was written on the 11th of January back in early 1922. It was first published in the famous Storyteller magazine and later appeared in Mansfield's short story collection The Dove's Nest. A Cup of Tea recounts the deplorable conditions of New Zealand society under British colonialism. It exhibits how materialism, hypocrisy, disparity, and more specifically class distinction was prevailing in those times. Mansfield mirrors the aforementioned issues via the character of Rosemary. Her actions and mentality depict those issues. At first, readers may see how Rosemary has a penchant for material gains. This is shown specifically when she desires to have a prized, beautiful little box. It represents the extravagance of Rosemary. Instead of spending her money in useful things, she desires to have that little box. Moreover, Mansfield has tactfully depicted appearance versus reality. She shows not everything is the same as it seems. There are many chances the appearance narrates something else. However, the reality is a lot different. The same occurs in the character of Rosemary, particularly when she tries to help Miss Smith. Firstly, she takes her home and then serves her. Though her actions may strike virtuous and kind to the readers, however, it is not real. Rosemary took advantage of Miss Smith's helpless condition. Her intentions were never to help her out. Rather, she tries to use her as a medium to propagate her fame and upgrade social status. She thinks that this act can provide her a chance to boast in a social circle. Mansfield used Rosemary for the depiction of upper classes who do the same. New Zealand back in the 19th century was the same. Upper classes were exploiting lower classes for their own benefits. Even the kind act of helping was not spared. It was used as an object to generate praise and material objects. Moreover, class distinction and the miserable condition of poor are also highlighted in the story. Mansfield shows how wealth was wrongly distributed in society. On one hand, Rosemary was a wealthy and well-dressed woman. She gets what she desires. On the other hand, Miss Smith is a poor girl with weak features and not properly dressed. She even begs Rosemary for the price of a cup of tea. This mirrors the poverty of the lower classes. Mansfield has thrown light on the prejudice and apathy of upper classes against lower classes. Rosemary helps Miss Smith, takes off her hat and coat. However, she doesn't show any respect to her belongings and throws them on the floor. This also indicates how upper classes turn a blind eye towards the poor's suffering. Additionally, Mansfield also highlights jealousy and insecurity of Rosemary. At first, she is cheerful for helping Miss Smith, though she doesn't respect her. However, when her husband praises Miss Smith's beauty, she got jealous. Afterward, she tries to send Miss Smith and Miss Smith ran away from her house by giving her some money. Rosemary got so insecure that she tried to allure her husband with her looks. Significance of the title. A cup of tea connotes the holier than thou nature of upper classes, how they even would virtuous acts for their own beneficial purpose, by making themselves hypocritically pious to upgrade their social status and gain praise from society. Their true intentions are not assisting them, rather manipulating them. Rosemary did the same while helping Miss Smith. Her intentions weren't to help her, but to boast her acts of kindness in society. Setting. The time frame of this story is set in the 1920s. However, the location shifts twice. Firstly, it takes place at the small antique shop on Curzon Street. Subsequently, it shifts to Fell's house. Symbolism. Following are the symbols used in the story. Box. Box's price and its ornamentations emphasize extravagance and materialism. Rosemary, when she saw this box, gets attracted to it. Though she has a desire to buy it, its price doesn't allow her. It represents how Rosemary, instead of spending on useful things, used to spend on worthless things. Also, it expresses her appeal for material gains. Cup of tea. Cup of tea symbolizes the sanctimonious upper class and exploitation of the poor class at the hands of the upper class. This suggests to readers how even the act of philanthropy is fake and used for its own beneficial purpose. The way Rosemary did to Miss Smith by helping her without true care and intimacy. All she thought was to boast that act in a social circle and gain praise. Hat. The hat is a symbol used to exhibit apathy and prejudice of the upper class against the poor. Rosemary at first tries to help Miss Nick to doff her hat and coat, but afterwards she shows her apathy. Instead of putting them in an appropriate place, she leaves them on the floor. This depicts the outlook of the upper class and the way of treating them. Imagery: Mansfield has used incredible imagery in the story. She tactfully portrays the weather according to the doleful mood of Rosemary, a cold, bitter taste in the air, as she couldn't buy an enamel box. Rain is showering, but due to the dark it seems like ashes falling on the ground, spinning down like ashes. Also the lights lit up in the rain looked sad and were regretting something. Similar to this, Mansfield exhibits Rosemary's hat that resembles a geranium petal in size and green ribbons that seem like leaves hung from a branch. The narrator also pictures the pathetic condition of the poor young girl and her skinny and weak features. The narrator says she is a frail creature having dishevelled hair, dark lips, and light eyes. In the same way, readers may find Mansfield using color imagery to visualize Rosemary's bedroom and its beauty. The narrator says the room was furnished with glossy furniture along with gold cushions and the primrose and blue rugs. Literary devices. Mansfield has used the following literary devices in the story: personification, metaphors, and similes. Readers may come across several personifications and similes in the story. The narrator says, "Her heart beats like a heavy bell." This shows how Rosemary feels insecure and jealous of the poor girl, praised by her husband, Phillips for charm looks. Similarly, Mansfield seems to personify weather with gloomy abstract such as cold bitter taste in the air. This represents a gloomy mood as she couldn't buy the little enamel box. Likewise, Mansfield also personified inanimate things with humanly attributes. For instance, the narrator says the lights of the house looked sad and were regretting something. Moreover, one can also see how the narrator is using different metaphors for young girls, that is, little battered creature, poor little thing, thin figure, new being, a light, frail creature with tangled hair and listless figure. Mansfield used the aforementioned metaphors to highlight the miserable condition and outlook of Rosemary towards poor people. In the same way, the narrator also shows poor young girl's features and actions with the help of metaphors and similes. The narrator says, "Voice like a sigh, almost like a sob," to emphasize her sorrows. Similarly, to depict a young girl as being skinny, the narrator says, "bird-like shoulders." Also, Mansfield applies metaphor to depict the action of shivering a young girl with a child by saying she seemed to stagger like a child. Further, the narrator used the metaphor of a geranium petal to express the charm of Rosemary's hair. Also, the narrator describes the glowing delicacy of the box and metaphorized it as though it had been baked in cream. Oxymoron. Readers may also find Mansfield using oxymoron at one point in the story. Oxymoron appears in the dialogue of Philip when he advises Rosemary to take good care of Miss Smith. He says, "Be frightfully nice to her." On one hand, it shows the concern of Philip towards the poor girl. On the other hand, it shows the dialect of Philip. Allusion: Mansfield is alluded to Dostoevsky to mirror the hypocrisy behind helping the poor the way Rosemary did. Hyperbole: Mansfield has exaggeratedly explained the wealth of Rosemary in the story. If Rosemary wants to go shopping, she would prefer Paris, unlike common people who go to Bond Street. Irony: Mansfield has allied irony on the philanthropy of upper classes. She rebukes the intentions to help others, which is nothing but to show off and maintain a status in society. This gives them a point to brag on. Tone and genre: the story is first told in a cheerful and enthusiastic tone; however, in the end, tone changes into disgruntled and bitter. A Cup of Tea is a short story written in realistic fashion.